Hello, dear friends. A little bit of a surprise live stream from me. It's been a few weeks since I've done anything on either Patreon or this YouTube channel. Been a lot of travels. My wife and I went to Florida for a few days to take part in John Heers's First Things Foundations, I should say, the Art of the Tamada event, which was a fantastic opportunity to be at a beachside resort for 3 days, meet with some people that were all very excited about and interested in the world of storytelling and having the opportunity to actually practice storytelling, both in front of a live audience and at a dinner table, proper festal dinner table. Truly amazing. I also had two trips unconnected with that. One was to Los Angeles with my seminary choir, and one was down to DC for Doxicon, which is um, a convention for science fiction and fantasy lovers that is geared mostly at Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants. It's explicitly Christian, probably the one and only of its kind. And I gave a lecture there about Saint Basil the Great's address to young men and what that can tell us about how we should read fantasy. Um, all these things you can, at least that lecture and some other things associated with these things that I've done for the past month, you can find on the Patreon community. It's been very busy. There's been a lot of traveling back and forth. I was really exhausted last week. I was hoping to get a bunch of things done right around Thanksgiving, and my body's like, "Yeah, keep dreaming, buddy. That's not going to happen." So I had to move some things over, and basically we missed a week of reading for the book club. You guys should be right around chapter uh, 10, 15 or so, and we're gonna this at the bottom of this video, or rather under this video in the Patreon community, you will see the reading assignment for the next section. And yeah, we're going to get back into it for the month of December. A little bit more relaxed. It's a difficult time for people to actually find time to read, but uh, we'll um, uh, we'll do what we can. But in the meantime, I wanted to say hello, remind you all of my existence, and yes, that I haven't forgotten about the book club, and let you all know that we will be having a book club party sometime in early December. It was supposed to be this weekend, but that's not gonna happen. Too many things going on. It was actually supposed to be last weekend, but that definitely didn't happen. So we will have that. It's going to happen soon. Keep an eye out if you are members of the Patreon community, the Waystone as we call it on the inside, for some updates and some plans for the future. I've been doing a lot of research and planning and seeing what the next year is going to bring, and I have some interesting ideas and hopefully interesting things for you to offer you guys over the next calendar year in 2024. But in the meantime, we are talking about The Heart of the World, book 3 of the Raven Sun series. This is possibly my favorite of the Raven Sun books. I really loved writing it. It was in a very interesting and special place when I wrote it. It was a very rich and fecund almost place. I was doing a lot of research. I was reading a lot of things about ancient Slavic mythology. It was a really fascinating experience. And that experience of writing probably was the point at which, as a writer, I stopped thinking about the process of writing and just finally got to a point where I was just telling the story. Book one, as you know, it took me a long time to actually get it into publishable form. Book two is a novella. Novellas are, for me, much easier to write because they're much more narrow in their focus, and they don't ask as much of the reader or the writer. And that story came to me very quickly. It didn't take a lot of editing to get into its final form. But The Heart of the World, which is book three of a 5-book series, the most treacherous because it's the middle book. And as we know, middle chapters are sometimes the most boring and the most difficult to navigate because you're trying to do two things. You're trying to make a middle chapter interesting, which is hard enough, but also connect that middle chapter in a meaningful way to the rest of the arc of the 5-story series. And in something that's fantasy like this, you can't just have, at least not in the kind of fantasy that I write, you can't have episodic little novels that have fully self-contained stories that don't really have much reference to each other except for kind of an overarching um, general theme, which is the kind of thing you see in mystery series, in some science fiction series, and in some fantasy series. But here, these stories are all very intertwined, interconnected. It's like one big story as opposed to five individual ones. So it was potentially a landmine, and I've already told some of you that the ending of book three, when you get to it, you'll see what I mean, was one of the biggest surprises that I've ever had as a writer, because it turned out that the ending was not at all what I had intended it to be. We'll get there when we get there, but in the meantime, where did this even come from? Why did I start a novel 20 years into the future after book one with not the main character from book one as the character who brings us into the story? Dangerous choice by the author, actually. And I've had some very dedicated and trustworthy readers tell me that they were initially very annoyed at me, because not only was there a big time break between books one and two, there's another further time break between books two and three, and we don't even see Voron in chapter one of book three. Some completely new character. We have to make completely new emotional ties with a character, a setting, a culture that we have not seen before. And some people were initially turned off, but there was a reason for it. And ultimately, I think most people came around to this way of beginning the story, because the absolute heart of this novel, and really of the entire Raven Sun series, is Haidu. Haidu is a fascinating character. Fascinating not because I made her up, but because she really made herself up. I want to show you the painting I have of her. Give me a second here. So if you're a patron, you will have seen a digital copy of this, but this is the original painting from Ruth Sanderson of Haidu on horseback for the first time since her um, injury, capturing the eagle, who is now the king of eagles, and she becomes the head hunter, even in spite of the fact that she is entirely crippled. Now you'll notice that the over here we have the special harness that ties her to the back of the horse, so that if she falls, it'll only be because of the saddle and not because she can't keep her weight up with her legs. So I'm not sure how well that would work, to be honest. I'm not somebody who's good at the physics of the things, but it looks convincing to me. And this is just a lovely painting. Like I said, you can get digital copies of this beautiful artwork inside the Patreon community. If you look at special or surprise gifts as one of the categories that we have in the Patreon page, you will find a post from a few years back where I shared this with people in a high resolution version that you can print. You can use as a background on your desktop. You can actually make art quality prints with those files. They are high resolution enough. So if that's something that's interesting to you, I'm definitely having that framed. It's been a long time. I should have had it framed a while ago, but it's going to go right here next to dear old Voron. So why start with Haidu? Well, the brief, quick version. One of the most galling and annoying reviews that I got of book one was from a writer in the UK. And clearly she had no experience of the historical reality of Russian versus Mongol in the beginning of the 13th century. And she gave me the typical kind of aggrieved woke person review of my novel. She resented being white and privileged, resented the fact that my bad guys were Asian nomads, and saw in that reality an expression of my I think white supremacy was actually a word she used. Yeah. Never mind the fact that this is entirely based on the actual historical realities of Russia being overrun by the Mongol horde of Genghis Khan, who then ruled Russia for 300 years. Never mind. And a lot of the critique there was things like they can't even speak normal language. They have this fake accent. They're all cardboard characters. They're not realistic as villains. Um, in other words, this is just privileged white guy writing a typical Asian other that is, and therefore this book is a abhorrent, and you shouldn't read it. And it should be added to the pile of books that must be burnt in central squares, right? So I was needled by that, because of course I can't help the fact that people don't know history, but in all critiques there is of course a lining of truth. So clearly the Gumiran in book one are not well fleshed out villains. They're not supposed to be. There's supposed to be a mysterious force that comes in. They're a kind of orc horde. And I'm sorry, you've read Lord of the Rings, you know that the orcs don't have personal journeys. They don't really care about anyone or anything. And the humanization of the orc, sorry, uruk, in the Rings of Power is one of the stupidest parts of that stupid show. But that being the case, to vilify all of the Mongols as being somehow villainous was never my intention nor my interest. And the point was made by one of my readers at a recent book club meeting. There's something important and um, proper about the salvation of Vasily coming from the outside. And the outside, not simply as a more pure form of old Vasilia, such as it is on Gavan Isle, but an infusion of new blood from those who conquered Vasilia. So the Glumiran. Haidu is a member of the last proper Glumiran clan who didn't go with the Dark Father into the west to conquer the country, all those lands for the Raven. They live in perpetual exile from their own people. I think that's something that is inherently quite tragic. This kind of thing does happen historically for some peoples. And I just found Mongolian culture really interesting. So I dug deep. Spirit dancing is something that happens. The different types of overtone singing, mother bear, wolf, father bear, which is mentioned in chapter 1, those are actual terms that throat singers use, at least in the Russian Altai, which is probably the closest analog to at least for purposes of I'm not sure historically if that's the closest analog to what the Mongols were, to what the Mongols were in the 13th century, but it's close enough. And for purposes of my research, it's certainly fascinating to look at the peoples of the Altai and Yakutia and places like that in the far east of Russia. So that's all historically based, right? The Queen Who Walks the Skies, that is a character from Yakutsk, from Yakutian folktales. So there's a lot of research that went into there to try to make this lost clan of the Gumiran as historically based as possible, because they're important, because they have like the kernel of truth that Vasilia lost. So to have it inherited by an externally broken member of the family who's actually internally as whole as anybody's you're going to find in the entire series, and her annoyance with Sabina in chapter 1 and the next chapter that she comes in is entirely based on this kind of like, what is wrong with you? How can you be abandoning your post? Look at me, like I'm totally broken and I'm living and I'm doing everything I can. I've just become head hunter of a nomadic tribe that is run by men. Let's do it, right? So she was a fantastic character to write. She was so much fun, and of course later on when we encounter her interaction with the hag, we'll talk a little bit about that, about how girls like that tend to do well with Baba Yaga and the traditional folktales. I think that's just really really great and fascinating stuff. But before we get any further, I think it's important to set the stage for what the Heart of the World is trying to do. There's multi-layered stuff going on. It's not just about the stories of the individual characters. There is like cosmic symbolism and mythology going on that is happening very much in the background, but it's like intertwined with everything that's going on. There is a battle for the soul of the world that's happening in this series. This is very much a Silmarillion level type of series. It's not as intimate and as specific as the conflicts and the desires of the characters in Lord of the Rings. This is very much a Silmarillion type of tale. So when you have images and some symbolic resonances, you're supposed to be perking up. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about Slavic mythology, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to tell you about some symbols of the cosmos that appears often in Slavic mythology, and in particular in this book, why I chose these images, so that when you see them and encounter them, your antennas should be going up and you should be thinking, okay, this is something important. So first off, there's a strange phrase you'll often encounter in Russian fairy tales: rivers of milk and banks of kisel. Kisel is a kind of fruit jelly. The strangeness is not just in the imagery, like the fact of the river being white and the banks being made of some fruit jelly, but in the fact that it's sometimes treated as nothing other than a kind of variation of a normal river. Like it's not a special river, it's just a river. And yet the imagery that's used is not blue and green and brown, but white and pink. So in the famous story, The Geese, the Swans, when I haven't told yet, but I will, the girl, the main character, stumbles onto the rivers of milk, the banks of Kisiel, which talk to her. That's a different story. And we're just left to imagine what this river looks like because no explanation is forthcoming. Now, if we equate it with something like the land of milk and honey, then we're getting closer to the mark. But that image is firmly from the biblical tradition. The Russian image comes from the ancient land of white waters. This is like the primordial source of water in Slavic mythology. It's a magical place that was brought into physical expression, that brings into physical expression the dreams of people about a perfect place of happiness and rest. Why are the rivers white? Well, because they flow from the udders of a heavenly cow. Yes, there was some form of cow worship in the early Slavic lands. And as for the banks of Kisiel, well, Russians and their berries, they love it. Another mythological symbol of the cosmos that's often found in Russian fairy tales is the island of Buyan. Now, that name should ring some bells. I've used that name for at least one character in the series. That's also entirely purposeful. This mythological island is a kind of center of the universe. It's often mentioned in Slavic stories, especially Russian ones. It's found far away in something called the Ocean Sea, which is kind of the archetype of all oceans. The island has miraculous powers, being the home of various magical objects that help the hero overcome monsters in the stories. It's also a place where the Stone of Alatir rests, from which the World Tree grows. Both the World Tree and the Stone of Alatir become important in Book 4. We'll talk about that when we get there. However, whoever can find the island of Buyan will have all his dreams come true. The island of Buyan is one of the archetypal influences for Galvan Isle. And so the fact that living water flows freely and is kind of present in the soil of the island of Buyan is important. It's pointing to the fact that there's a reason why this place is a kind of temporary stopover, kind of paradisal pause for the good people of Vasilia who didn't betray their god. But it also means that there are going to be some traditional fairy tale prohibitions associated with that water, which Antamir encounters in the first chapters and is not very happy about. In addition, the island of Buyan is oftentimes associated with, or kind of interchangeable with, something called the Garden of Edi or the Garden of Virai. This is a warm, sunny land of eternal greenery found beyond the sea to the east. Sometimes it's an island. It's a kind of pagan foreshadowing of the Garden of Paradise. Sometimes the world trees found here. Siren live in the branches of the world tree that is in Edi, and all birds, doesn't matter who they are, high birds or low birds, they all come to this island to winter. Traditionally, the birds begin leaving to go to the Garden of Edi on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, which is September 14th. In Ukrainian tales, the key to this place is kept by a crow. But when the crow angered the gods, they gave the keys to another bird, either a cuckoo or a skylark. So there are many folk traditions that have to do with either catching or releasing the birds of spring. Because if you don't catch or release the bird of spring at the proper time of the year, you're going to compromise the coming of spring because they won't come back from the Garden of Paradise. They'll stay there because it's nice there. Another beautiful image that has cosmic significance in Slavic mythology is something called the World Mountain. Mountains have always been associated with union with God. Going up the mountain is a metaphor for encountering the transcendent in many, many traditions. In many mythological traditions, the qualities of this world mountain become transmuted into the world tree. Tree, mountain, they're quite similar. In ancient times, people saw the mountain as a kind of microcosm of the world, which reflects all the elements of the cosmos, but in miniature, which is what microcosm means, yeah? The gods live at the summit, the people live at the foot, and the evil spirits live underneath. Now, in Slavic mythology, there is often a dualistic opposition of two mountains. A white mountain, the home of the white god, Bielobog, and a black mountain, the home of the black god, Chernobog. This is a dualistic uh, early version of some Slavic paganism. This dualistic opposition is also found in such fairy tale characters as Svitogor, who appears in season 2 of In a Certain Kingdom and will be appearing again in some of the fairy tales that I tell in a Certain Land. He's a mountain height warrior. And also, interestingly, the dragon's Megarinish is also associated with the mountain. This is also one of the reasons why I mixed up giants and serpents in my fairy tale, because they effectively play the same role, symbolically speaking. Though Christians used this ancient symbolism to great effect by building churches on high places, there was also an understanding, especially for amongst the common people in Russia, that some high places are kind of nexus or a nexus or a gathering place of evil powers. So you have to be careful about which mountains you ascend. Now, you may have noticed that there was a unfamiliar monster that you would have encountered in the first chapter on Gavan Isle, where Antamir and his very large and strong protector encounter something called the vila. Now, vila are in some ways similar to Russian mermaids. They exist in the mythologies of nearly all Slavic groups, and they're more prevalent in other Slavic groups than Russian groups. They're especially beautiful. They live in water and in forests near the water. Even in ancient times, they were sort of water nymph, and they always had some sort of bird-like qualities. They can fly, they might have beaks. Their bodies, which looked young, were dressed in white but were almost transparent. Rain maidens. They could flash like lightning and had long, unbraided hair over their back and their chest, covering their nakedness, right? Because it's all about the suggestion, not the obviousness of the nudity. More frighteningly, they often had either horse hooves or goat hooves, which of course means that they are evil of nature. But they would try to hide them with their semi-translucent white robes, or sometimes their hair. Vila were supposed to be born of a union of dew and grass, which is interesting because dew was also considered a form of magic water, which we'll talk about next time when we have a little bit of a insider view of the book next week. They also have shape-shifting abilities, and that shape-shifting ability does appear in the first few chapters of The Heart of the World, which is why I'm talking about them now. They also have beautiful voices, and their song is a kind of anti-Syrian song, which is also why Gamayun attacks them, because they're trying to do what the Syrian do, and they're doing it badly. In this sense, they're closer to the classical sirens, actually, than the Syrian are, which is odd. And if a man is seduced by them, he loses all joy in life, and eventually he's like sucked dry and he dies. However, if they are the interested parties, they can be extremely useful. In other words, if you can attract them, not they attract you. If you can be the one attracting them, they're very potentially dangerous, but sources of interesting magical knowledge and power. They can teach all kinds of practical and interesting things. There are Vila in Harry Potter. That's the only other place probably where most people would have encountered them, and you definitely get that vibe from them. They're all from Bulgaria, by the way. Slavic mythology. Absolutely. Well, that was a little bit of an insider's view into what sort of things are going on the cosmic level of the Heart of the World. If you want to find out more about this, stay tuned. If you're already a member of the Waystone, my Patreon community, I'm going to be sharing this stuff with you next Monday, hopefully, if everything goes well. Otherwise, if you're not yet a member, it's never too late. Come and join us. You just need to be as low as the $2 a month to be a member of the book club. It's not on one of the higher tiers. So come on over and join us. We're a friendly group, and we're just starting with the book. And by the way, I forgot to mention, but I do still have codes, audiobook codes for anybody who's interested. Free audiobook codes of The Heart of the World. Oh, I forgot to mention, the reason that I talked about cosmic mountains is that The Heart of the World has to do with Vasilia Mountain, which if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. The mountain of Vasilia is a cosmic mountain, and there's something very important about the fact that it is a mountain that we're going to find out about when we get to the end. Thomas says, I've always found it intriguing how many mythical creatures are represented across so many disparate cultures, giants, dragons, mermaids, etc. Yeah, Tolkien calls it the cauldron of story. And our name is really the Fellowship of Cow Country. All right, Thomas. Very good. Thomas refuses to accept the Waystone as our official name or unofficial name. I'm okay with that. The Fellowship of Cow Country is good too. That's all I have for today. I got to run. We in the new house are still doing some renovation work, so I got to get over there and start carrying heavy things. But it's good to be back with you all again, and just wanted to rekindle a bit of that fire and that desire to keep reading and talking about the wonderful world of Russian fairy tales, and in the particular incarnation of the Raven Sun series. It's good to see you all, and see you soon.